Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Robin Winters-Sperry. She's a senior medical affairs professional, and we talk about the holes in medical affairs hiring and recruitment. It's an awesome conversation. You guys are going to love this. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube. We put all our videos up there, and join us for MSL Talk Live, which is typically the first Tuesday of every month, and we make those announcements on LinkedIn. And connect with me and follow me on LinkedIn if you haven't already. Thanks so much. Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey, Robin, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you, Tom. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. We've been planning this for a long time. I know Robin for a million years, and I every time I run into her or talk to her or see her at a meeting, we come up with all these ideas, and we're finally going to do this. And this was actually an idea that Robin came up with, and it has to do with the hole in hiring within medical affairs. So before we get into that, I'm just going to have Robin do a quick introduction, but this is going to be an awesome conversation. So stay tuned, grab a pad, and get ready for some notes. So Robin, why don't you just do a quick intro? Tell everybody who you are, where you're from, all that good stuff.
Sure. So I'm Robin Winters-Sperry. I am living in the New England area, somewhere between Rhode Island, Boston, and Maine, due to kids and family and life. So I've been in medical affairs, as Tom said, for many, many years, mainly focusing on field medical over recent years in a global capacity, and also have built many medical affairs teams, worked in many of them. And that's really come from both working directly within companies such as Novartis and Sanofi and building their teams, and also working as a consultant and building other teams, such as working with Yamanouchi and Fujisawa when they formed Astellas, as examples. So been doing this for quite a while, been friends with Tom for a very long time, as he said. So it's really going to be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it. So I'll turn it back over to you, Tom, because it's always great to do it with trusted colleagues, but also folks that are friends.
Yeah. It's a long time. And guys, I think this is going to be a great topic in a lot of ways. So this is going to be something that as a job seeker, you can learn a lot from, but on the hiring side, so if you're a hiring manager, you work within a medical affairs organization, there's going to be a lot of stuff for you guys to take from this as well. So what I want to start with is, Robin, you've been around, obviously, as you said, you've built teams and you've been around for a long time and you've seen a lot, but when companies are building out, when companies are hiring within medical affairs, what are some of the main frustrations that you see as a hiring manager?
I think, it's always getting the right candidates, getting them on time. But I think, from my perspective, but I think if you step back a little bit, because you and I have talked about this quite a bit over the years, is making sure that people being the hiring manager in the company, start with a well-defined job description, because you can't find something if you don't know what you're looking for. Sounds very logical, but sometimes people start interviewing and the candidate says, well, can I see the job description? And the answer is, well, we're still making it. Well, if you're still making it, then how do you know what you're looking for? So it's elements like having a well-defined job description, clearly in that defining roles and responsibilities, because in particular in the field, there may be other field members out there. So, who's doing what, and is it clearly defined? And even between internal and external medical affairs, is it clearly defined, for example, between what a medical director does and what an MSL does, and what the role of the MSL manager is? So that's a lot of it. And then I know we'll talk about the interview process and who sits on the interview, but really getting clearly defined roles, responsibilities, the job description. And if you're working globally, to at least have consistency in the way you're describing the job, so that it then can be localized for whatever that local region market needs.
Yeah, well, I agree. I think that that's one of the biggest issues. And when to add to that, I think there's always that criteria of what the goal is. What's the goal for hiring each position? What exactly is the hiring manager looking for? What are the must-haves? There's the job description, which hopefully is as comprehensive as practical, but then there's what goes beyond that job description? Is there a certain need within the team for a certain type of individual, whether it's logistically, whether it's years of experience, whatever that might be? I think that that message also has to be clear when defining the job description, the goals, the criteria. That all goes hand in hand. It's not just, okay, job description, just go out there and find it. There's always, well, what is our goal? What are we really ultimate? What's the bullseye? What would be the A candidate? So I think that's important. But what are the main bottlenecks that you see? We talk about the hole in the hiring process. So that, to me, that means that there's bottlenecks somewhere. So what might they be?
Well, there are definitely bottlenecks in processes, as there are with any processes, as you know. But one of the main bottlenecks is that a lot of times well, let me start with, it depends on who is reviewing the resume, the CV. Because as you know, I'm sure, and have thoughts about this as well from the recruitment side, but once they come in, who are the ones that are looking at them to say this candidate made sense, this one doesn't? Because a lot of times good candidates get missed because, and I'll go back to field medical for a minute, just because there's so many different titles for similar roles. It does an MSL mean the same thing as field medical, and there's field medical the same as field-based medical, and is that the same as the millions of other names that are out there for MSLs and similar roles. So you want to make sure that people know the vernacular and know what they're looking for. But one other point I want to make that we've talked about in the past as well is you also may change a bit the personality, the characteristics of the candidate that you're looking for, not beyond the core science needs, of course, but competencies. But you really or if you start looking at the whole team as a team builds, or other resources, if you're a smaller team, do you have HEOR out there? Do you have a CRO if they're going to potentially help with research? Those types of things, and then look to fill in those gaps. Because when you hire a team with 2 people, the dynamics become very different as a team grows. And different talent and different skills are usually brought in. Do you have people with clinical experience? Do you have people that are PharmDs who have worked in hospitals or academic centers? All of those things should be taken into consideration, especially as the team itself evolves. So the first bottleneck, back to your first question, is really getting it through the review process, making sure there's the right amount of budget and people are realistic. In terms of what they want to hire, how they want to hire. Do they want skilled people that have already been MSLs, which will come with their own baggage, or do they want people that are brand new that they'll train, which becomes more of a burden on the manager, which is okay too. It just really depends on how the elements are going to come together.
Right. And I think that there are, getting back to this bottleneck thing, I think that there's sometimes there's unknown bottlenecks that come up. So the more organized, the more well-defined you are, the easier it is to handle some of the bottlenecks that might come up in the hiring process. So for example, in a competitive market, there are going to be people that just don't last. So you might be putting your eggs in certain baskets that all of a sudden it's like, wow, we just lost that candidate unexpectedly. If the process is set up properly, hopefully there's a backup or maybe even 2 backups. But if not, you wind up with, okay, we got to start search all over again. So organization is really is key. Process is key. But what do you think, as you see in your experience, as you see some of the challenges that traditionally you might face as a hiring manager, what do you think ultimately needs to be changed in order to improve the process?
Well, I think, as you speak about it as a process, it certainly is. But there are, there's information needs along the process, and then there are people needs along the process. So we haven't even talked about who should be interviewing them, ideally. But let's talk about, are people prepared for what they're supposed to do? If a candidate is coming in, do the interviewers have a copy of the candidate's CV? Do they know what role they're interviewing this person for? Because I've seen times where people have said, I'm not quite sure why I'm interviewing this person. And it's worse when they say that to the candidate. Oh yeah, I'll talk to you, but I'm not sure why. Yeah, so make sure they have the job description. Excuse me, they have the job description, they have their CV. I like to have a interview guide, and whoever the interviewers are, that they know clearly what they're looking for. What is their role in the interview process? Because I personally like to have a cross-functional team. And the other thing is have a conversation with HR and with the recruiters, if you're using recruiters, ahead of time, and say, this is the type of team we're building. These are the characteristics we're looking for. Is it rare disease? Is it oncology? All of those sorts of things. Do you want seasoned people? Will you take people? Do you want a blend of seasoned and you'll take some that, are fresh out of school, that type of thing? But make it very clear what the manager's goals and responsibilities are, as well as their objectives for these candidates. Because one of the things the candidate should always ask is, what do you call, success in a role? So that was a lot of things but I do think that they're all part of the process. It's really knowing what you're after and also communicating that to the people that are involved along the chain, that they also know what they should be looking for and what their roles are, and to move things along. Because you mentioned losing good candidates. You can lose a great candidate in a couple of days. And some of these companies take months and months. So that's not even a bottleneck. That's a mountain to climb.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But you bring up a good point, and that is this idea of team dynamics and the question of who should be involved in the hiring process. So I think that's probably my next question is, what do you think that should look like? What would a good team makeup look like when interviewing and building out, let's just say, an MSL team?
I mean, at times that I've had to build out a team from scratch, you start sort of with the basics. This is what I want in the candidates. But then as they start coming in, you start hiring, you start looking at what are skills that a new person could bring in. Do I have someone who's a PharmD who really understands that part? Do I have someone who's been in medical managed care? If we're filling those kinds of roles, or we don't have another role like that, so we want that experience within the actual MSL team. Do we, if it's med info, are we looking for candidates that have had prior experience, or asking them key questions like, do you like to read even? Because some of these roles they have to read a lot and be able to interpret a lot of science, which all of them do have to interpret science, but some to a greater extent with different levels of skills between presentations, written skills, oral skills, and so forth. So in terms of the interview team, I personally like a cross-functional team. I think with commercial colleagues, especially district managers, people like that, they see different things. They're very attuned in general to great social skills, because an MSL has to have that balance of science and knowledge and personality, and they have to be able to communicate with many different types of people. So people working on the commercial side in many ways are much more attuned to that, as well as the business needs. We don't need to we need to make sure that they have the integrity and they have the ability to learn the new science. They don't have to necessarily know all of the science from the company they're interviewing with at that point, because that much they will be taught. But we want to make sure that we're looking at multiple dimensions of them. Do they have integrity? What happens when they don't know the answer? Are they giving you a proper answer along the lines of, I'll get back to you? I don't know, but I'll get back to you. Or do they start making things up, which I have seen, which is a killer for
So then what happens? So you have a team, an interview team assembled, and it's cross-functional. So you have some people from HR and you have people from different areas within medical affairs that weigh in. Now, would you say, in your opinion, do the interviewers go through some type of training, or how are they equipped and how are they assessed in an organization? Is it a common practice to say, well, we want this person to be on the panel because they're the best interviewer, or they have a good track record, or I trust their judgment? How does that part work internally?
It would be great to say, yes, they're always picking people that they're constantly evaluating and saying, do they have the right skills? Have they been given, appropriate feedback? Do we get together at the end of the day to review the candidates to expedite the process? Um, One, I don't think, especially on the medical director level, when you're a medical director, you don't necessarily know how to run an MSL team. When you're, an MSL, you don't necessarily know how to go into med info. All these roles work in great partnership, but they're not necessarily roles that the other one understands fully, what the person should be doing. So first, a hiring manager needs to explain what they're looking for. I think when the interviewers are going to get ready to interview, they should have some lessons and how to interview. So you don't want to insult candidates when you're interviewing. You want to be able to ask candidates questions that are germane to the role, on some level. For field medical, which we're talking a lot about field medical, because they're often the majority of medical affairs as well, and they come from such eclectic backgrounds, more so than the medical directors and med info and some of the other roles that you see in medical. So having said that, though, you really need to make sure that the people that are interviewing them have interviewing skills. And no, specifically, do I think they've had courses on how to interview? I don't think many of them have, nor do I think many of them have had a lot of courses on how to provide effective feedback, which also takes place sometimes in the interview process. The candidate needs to feel they're being really interviewed thoroughly, but they also need to feel that they have trust in that manager, because they're going to come for the manager. The joke is always they come for the pipeline, but they leave because of the manager. So you want them to have a solid relationship with the hiring manager, ideally.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes back to, as we look at the need to have a good panel and to have good interviewers, there also has to be a good process. Mm-hmm. And how does that process get structured? So how many people are in the interview process? How many interviews should there be to complete the process, right? You mentioned everybody should get together and provide feedback. Is there a debrief scheduled after, a week of interviews or a round of interviews? So let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, what have you seen be effective, and what do you think should be the best process?
I think the best process should be a team of interviewers, especially if you're interviewing, if you have multiple positions coming up, or, people come and go. So, if you have your kind of core team of interviewers and backup, so mm-hmm. that, if you have a monthly day, it depends on how many you're hiring, how quickly you're hiring. So, but just for example, if you're hiring a large team, one year I had to hire 40 people in a year. So it had to be a good process. It had to be expeditious, or we would have lost candidates as soon as we were bringing them in, because it's a very hot market. So I had, for example, the hiring manager, which is me. I had somebody from marketing, because I trusted them. They were involved with one of the major products, that the MSLs were going to deal with. So it's important that they had a relationship. I had a district manager on there, because they're so used to interviewing sales reps that they weren't there to interview and judge them on the science, but they were there to look at personality and characteristics in terms of getting along with other people, and things that a liaison really needs. Then, of course, there's HR in there, and then sometimes it might have even been somebody from the team, because these are going to be their colleagues. And and of course, whatever went on in that room stays in that room. It was all very, professional. We had a time at the end of the day, so they would meet through the day. If it was an extensive amount of candidates, we would have a couple throughout the week, but they would meet, and we'd always have a quick debrief. And at times, honestly, if it was 4 or 5 o'clock, we would do things like bringing in coffee, or if it was a French company, bring in a glass of wine, to really encourage the day It has to thank the interviewers and to encourage them to show up because we need their feedback. Because
Yeah.
you don't want the feedback of one. And I've seen that. And it's very frustrating when you're asked to interview, even globally, because I've been involved in a lot of global interviews. Even with the time change, I at least write up my assessment right after and send it to the hiring manager and HR. So, whether they have a formal meeting or not, they get the assessments and they gather them, which is also, talk about the process. That's also a place where things fall off. Make sure they have the resume ahead of time, the CV, make sure they have the interview schedule so you know who they're interviewing with, and get that feedback from the interviewer.
And like you
And
said
sometimes,
before, yeah, and like you said before, having the right process, having the right people, having everything organized, then the person that is interviewing, you're not going to have that situation where the person says, I don't know what, I'm interviewing you. I don't even know why I'm interviewing you or what
yeah.
it's about. Like that can't happen. That's totally
Oh, it
unacceptable.
does happen.
And it does. I know.
I've seen it. I've seen it happen. And I've seen candidates come in and say things like, oh, I just heard about this interview and I just didn't have the chance. I had to get on the plane and the day after, and I just didn't have a chance to look up the pipeline. To me, that's, well, too bad. You're
You're
going to make it
going in.
beyond the interview. We're not going to waste people's time.
You failed before you even started. So
yeah, I mean, thank you. Go have lunch. Nice to meet you. See you later.
The getting back to that debrief piece of it, I think is probably the most important part. Well, if not one of the most important parts. I think when that gets skipped and that gets missed, then there's the momentum that happens within a search when you're interviewing multiple candidates for a position. And you guys are super busy. So you want to make sure that while it's fresh, there is this collection of thoughts. And there's that, one of the things that's important when you interview people, you want to really reflect on the feeling that person left you with. It's not just what the person said, what the person did. How did they make you feel? Did you have a good feeling about one candidate over another candidate? All things being equal, who wants the position most? Where's the energy and the enthusiasm from the candidate? So that all gets assessed in that debrief, whether it's the day of or the next day. But if it's a week or two later, you're like, wait, who was that person? I forget how I felt. I forget. I think that's really, really key in the process is that debrief.
Well, and you brought up a point too. Sometimes if you can do it, it's great to bring in 2 or 3, not much more than that in a day, just because it gets confusing. But and you want to keep them apart,
Right.
so they're not running into each other ideally in the hallway. But to bring in 2 or 3 candidates the same day, again scheduled, staggered in their schedules, but so people can get a feel of what's out there. When they're trying to fill the role, do you like candidate A, B, or C? What are they going to bring to the party? Which one has which skills and what does everybody think? Because sometimes it's also a feeling. I mean, I interviewed a candidate one time who had he had the science, he had the personality, he had a little bit too much of himself in there. But the one thing I noticed is he would not talk to the admins when he came in. He was making decisions about who were you, what was your title, and if it was worth them talking to you. And I learned about that during the debrief. Well, that knocked him out as a candidate, frankly, because especially as a medical liaison, when they're working out there by themselves, if they can't get along with multiple people on multiple levels and be respectful, then I don't care how much they know, they're not going to do well in that job.
I totally agree.
But that came out of the debrief. That came out of an assessment of multiple people seeing different sides of them, so to speak.
Yeah. And that's huge. And that's such a basic thing. But guys, when you're interviewing, you have to understand you're being judged in every aspect of the interview. The way you pick up the phone on a phone screen, the way you close out each conversation, how you treat others, and how prepared you are. Every single thing you do is being evaluated. So I want to talk to you about interview questions and your opinion, in your experience. So in your experience, have you seen it effective for everybody to be organized in their interview questions and questioning? Is it organized to the extent where Robin asks these questions and John asks these questions? Is everybody asking the same questions? Talk about that a little bit.
I mean, there have been times when there have been big teams because we're doing a lot of this. So, as things get bigger, processes get more formalized, So I do like to have a general interview guide. And we'll always have a conversation with the people that are involved in the panel and say, look, you're on the commercial side. What are the things that are important to you in working with an MSL? Because you also don't want them giving them wrong information. So it's really having those conversations with the interviewers and saying, for you on the commercial side, can you look at, their personality? Do you think they fit in well? Do they know, what is their judgment about traveling and working independently and things like that? When they're talking to the medical director, for example, take a look at what they know from that therapeutic area. How much do they know? Do they have the general skills of being an MSL? That's certainly what I'm going to ask the manager. Also, if I'm not the hiring manager, do they not only have the science, but do they have the skills? Everybody's missing something. So we understand that, but, we want to make sure that they have good presentation skills, not just are they dressed and, have their clothes on, front wise, but, I like to have them also do a presentation, and I invite the interviewers to come to the presentation. So hopefully you get more than one or two to show up, just to listen to them and see how. I'm more looking to see how they handle themselves and how they handle themselves, especially in situations when they get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
When they say, I don't know all the answers, because nobody knows all the answers, but it's how you handle it that makes that so important, because they're out there independently a lot. So you want to make sure that they can build trust and they're doing their job with integrity.
Well, and one of the things that a lot of my clients do is they intentionally add curveball questions into the process, especially after the presentation. So a person presents, they're going to ask them a curveball question to see how they handle it and to see if they're going to stay poised. And if they don't know the answer to the question, answer that with, that's really important. I want to make sure I get you the right information. So if it's okay, I'm going to get back to you with, I'm going to do a little research and get back to you. Like, guys, you really need to be prepared for the curveball, because it's probably going to come in some way, shape, or form, and you're going to be evaluated on how well you handle it. So last question, and then I think we're going to flip the script a little bit. I know you wanted to ask me a couple of questions. So what's your feeling on the use of third-party search firms? And you don't have to say yes, definitely, it's the greatest thing in the world, just because I represent the third-party search firm community.
And you're right in front of me. I'm like, all right, yeah.
Like pros, cons, like actually not even pros, cons. In your experience, has it been something that's been beneficial for you? And when does it make the most sense?
I think, like any resource, it makes sense at certain points in time. If you're in a situation where you're hiring one person and you've got a big network, the hiring manager has a big network, or a colleague does, and someone's identified, well, then no, because the HR is doing more and more of the, going through the portal and bringing in different CVs. I think the challenge with that is they're seeing so many. I absolutely respect what they're doing, but they're seeing so many. Do they always know the vernacular as well? The terminology, the different names that can be applied to some of these roles. When you're dealing with, a recruitment specialist like yourself, I know you've got a history of all these MSLs, all these medical directors. The personalities, where they've been, the ones that might, and you also know the hiring managers a lot of times. So you have a good idea of what the pairing should look like, because in many ways it's like a marriage, and I think the recruiters have brought in, when I've worked with them, they save a lot of time from the manager's perspective, because they can get in there and say, here, I heard you, this is what you said you were looking for. And then these are candidates that fit the bill, this one. And then they give you the rundown of the candidates too. Saves a lot of time. And it also expedites the process, because, there's something in it for them. They get paid when the candidate's successfully placed, but they're also bringing in quality candidates rather than just throwing things in at you. So, I think that there are places for recruiters, absolutely, and you usually see them more on the higher levels where I think the goals and the objectives for the roles and the payment are higher, so they want to be more laser focused when the candidates come in, as opposed to getting piles that take a long time to go through from HR. So yes, I do think there are lots of places, but I think to that end, we're looking for candidates that have lots of different characteristics in medical. People need to know what, they're not pure research. Usually they're not, pure, liaisons, so to speak. Then, they do a lot of different things within medical affairs. So the recruiters need to really understand that. And like you've got a huge pool of people that and a huge network that if you don't know them, you can find out about them. It's a lot easier if we can say to you, privately, so what do you really think of these candidates? Do they make sense? Why are you presenting them?
And that's really one of the main parts of the whole equation, is that you're hiring someone for their expertise and their experience in the market to be able to navigate through that process and help you avoid pitfalls. To your point, and I'm just going to reiterate what you just said, it can be really efficient, more quality candidates, faster process, improved time to hire. Listen, I didn't say it. You said it. It's a good thing sometimes. But let's actually transition. So obviously, I've been doing this a long time, and I have experience, 30 years of industry experience, over 20 on the recruitment side. So what questions might you have for me as it relates to this topic?
Well, it always fascinates me. I mean, I can do, there are little things for the candidates that I look for, like, do they send thank you notes, for their follow-up skills, but that's all well and good. But a lot of times that's after the fact, but starting at the beginning, if we go out and I say, Tom, we're going to fill this group. Well, we are looking for these candidates. What have you seen over the years? I mean, I used to take my CV and send it to a friend of mine who was a recruiter and say, how do I look? For whatever next job, and I've had had the good fortune of a lot of great, experience, but, some of that I would bounce it off of her and say, well, what do you think? Not where should I go, but how am I looking? Does it look more researchy? Does it look more, field medical, office medical? So what have you seen over the years, and what advice, well, let me split that into two questions. First, what changes have you seen over the years in the candidates, both the candidates themselves and also what the companies are asking you for?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with what companies ask for. So what we're seeing over the course of years of evolution of hiring in medical affairs is that the clients are getting more specific in their requirements and in their needs. The MSL role has evolved. When we first started recruiting MSLs, it was like, well, just find me a PharmD or a PhD that lives, in a certain area and has, some type of neuroscience experience. Well, now it's like, find me a PharmD in Toledo, Ohio, that specializes in solid tumor, specific type of cancer, that has relationships at, like, it's sometimes really, really specific. So it's the nature of the search then changes, because it now becomes a game of chess where you're really trying to find the right pieces for the right client. So when it comes to the candidate experience, now we have candidates that come to us and they say, hey, Carolan Group, we know you guys are experts in this space. Find us a job. And it becomes playing, again, it's a game of matching up the pieces. So I could have a great candidate, and Robin, you can refer somebody and say, oh, you really have to help my friend. And I'll take your friend and talk to them, or one of my recruiters will talk to them. They'll be awesome. They just don't fit the specific needs and requirements of the client because everything's so specific. So it's become really important to understand that there's a lot of nuance involved in hiring and recruitment, and the better job you can do as a candidate to portray your strengths your value proposition, whether it's scientifically, your communication skills, everything you bring to the table as a candidate, very, very clearly. Establish your brand and your expertise, and that's going to help position you better in the marketplace.
So let's talk about that for a second, because, it reminds me of a day I was driving, got a call from someone I knew a few years ago, and they said, "Oh, I'm a recruiter." I'm driving along and, half listening, and he said, "Oh yeah, well, I see you're with MSLs and in your current company. We could do MSL, so call me. We can." And I'm driving along, and I said, "You can find MSLs." Okay, well, we're, as Tom, as you just said, there's specific, having relationships with them to know them. And the question I said to them, which basically ended the conversation, was, so of the ones you could find and all the ones that you have found, how many of them were placed in roles as MSLs? Dead silence. So there are lots of people that can say, "Oh yeah, I know MSLs, I can find them." It's like, yeah, you can find them. I mean, I could look under rocks too, but I want a recruiter, like you're saying. It's also your reputation,
Right.
as a recruiter, that people can, that you're not sending their resumes all over the place, because you just said, that some of the candidates they may be great candidates, but don't match the role that the company wants. So you're not just pitching in anything that gets in your hands. The candidates are well aware of what you're doing, so you're not surprising them, but all of a sudden there were CVs showing up at the company where they're working, who then finds out that they're looking. Those kinds of situations. So tell me, you talked about the company side. What about on the candidate side? Are you seeing any changes in what their CVs are looking like, or what they think they're looking like, or their aspirations for longevity or not, within these roles?
Well, we're seeing a lot of trends now. We're seeing trends where, it's still the MSL role is one of the hottest roles that exist. So there's a lot of aspiring MSLs that are out there trying to break into the pharmaceutical industry. And then there's a lot of different types of MSL roles that exist now that didn't exist before. So the trends of how, I keep using the word evolution, how the role has evolved in medical affairs does create more opportunity. And it also creates different avenues for people that didn't exist before. So I'll give you another example. We're seeing a trend towards, back in the day, it was find us a PharmD, an MD, or a PhD. Well, now there's a need or a desire for clinical folks, people that come from, advanced practice nurses and nurse practitioners, and folks that come from that clinical background, the clinical nursing background, even folks that come from the diagnostic side. So I think what's important is, as a candidate, you have to be prepared to lead with your strengths and really showcase your experience, your knowledge, and what you can bring to that organization. But you brought up a good point, Robin. You have to support your claims. You can't just, it's very easy to document something in writing. It's very easy to call a hiring manager and say, "Yeah, we do MSLs. I'll find you MSLs." "Oh, really? Prove it. How many MSLs have you placed in the last year?" You can't fake that. So be careful, especially now with ChatGPT. You can make your resume look and say whatever you want it to say. You can take a job description and match the keywords, phrases, and language to your resume or CV to the point where it's an exact match. It's going to get through all the applicant tracking system filters. If you can't support your claims, you're dead in the water. You're not moving forward in the interview process. As a matter of fact, you're wasting people's time. So as much as I recommend you do that, I only recommend you do that with information that you can support, that's factual, that's correct. So that's just, there's a lot to unpack there, but keep in mind that you put your best foot forward, but do it in such a way that you can support it.
Well, but that also then means do your homework on both ends. Do your homework on what you're presenting and what you can back up, which is what you just said, but also do your homework on the company. Is this
Yeah,
the kind of place that you want to work? Is this the kind of place that, does it have a cultural fit for you? Does it, have you looked at their research, their pipeline, the things that are important to you? One of the questions I always ask in MSL is, what does a good week look like to you? Can and I probe if they haven't worked independently before. Can you work on your own because you're part of a virtual team? I personally think it's one of the best jobs in the world, but you have to have the personality and the self-motivation and the discipline to do well. But use your recruiter too. If you have the good fortune of working with someone like you, Tom. I mean, we've been friends for a long time and wouldn't be if we didn't have I believe mutual respect for each other. But go to if you are working with a recruiter, ask them about the culture of the company. Ask them about, and I've often asked, what happened to the person that was in this role before, if
sure.
there was someone, or is it a lot of roles I've personally been in have been roles that I've that have been created, or that they said, here's a new group we're building, here's a new position, what would you do to figure it out? Which are things that I love because I like those kinds of challenges. But really look at what you're getting into. Look at the hiring manager, look at the portfolio, look at any information that you can gain from HR, from anybody, sales folks around, friends, colleagues, and use your network. I mean, Tom, I know you use yours very well. And, when you find candidates, you're also checking many different things around there. Do you want to talk about that for a second? Because that network from a hiring manager side to the candidate side, you want to be on the candidate side in a good network so that you have trust in someone who may say, hey, I think I have a job for you, and trust that it's something you might be interested and not just a waste of time. On the hiring manager side internally, you want to make sure that the pool that the recruiter or who's ever finding those candidates for you says, look, these look like good candidates, that they know what they're talking about, and that it would be a good match and not wasting people's time. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that one of the most important things you can do for your career every single day, you need to work on your relationships. And what that means is you have to add networking into your daily or weekly role and responsibilities. There's
Mhm.
internal networking with internal colleagues, there's external networking, there's building up your LinkedIn connections, even if it's sending out a couple of connection requests per day. So, for example, you're going about your normal business and you meet some new people, or you have a meeting and there's 5 people on the meeting. Well, write down each person's name that you meet with, make a connection with that person, go on to LinkedIn, say, hey, it was so nice meeting you today on the call with talking about whatever, blah, blah, blah. Would love to add you to my professional network on LinkedIn. And that's how you do it. You don't want to try to hit a 5-run home run and just say, well, every Saturday I'm going to send out 25 connection requests, because you know what, you're never going to do it. But if you make it a point, little by little, piece by piece, every single day, even if it's just the people that you meet, or if you're on the job market and you have time, then you really have to do this consistently to get your name out there and build. So there's a lot of different ways to create relationships, to build your network, and to focus on it. But the best way, in my opinion, is you want to do it little by little each day, and then over the course of time, you're building out this network and you're solidifying relationships. And you don't realize it, but there's this invisible progress that's happening. And when it comes time where you need a favor, or you need someone, or you need to get your resume in front of the right person, you have the network ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, I will go check things out. I network a lot. I've had, a lot of great friends like you that our jobs have changed. You meet in pharma and then they wind up in different places. And, people always joke that pharma is a huge world of people, but a very small neighborhood of friends and colleagues, because I belong to MAPS and very active in that, in the Medical Affairs Society. And, we have 11,000 members now. And so many of them, when you meet them, you've known them in different places. And as you mentioned, LinkedIn, and also, we get back to recruiters because that's our topic. But, the recruiters like you are keeping track of people too. And when you're looking for a role, I've had many conversations with you and others where they'll say, oh, if you're looking for someone that's had research experience and they've also had X, Y, and Z experience, I know someone, because they've now added a few more of those to their background, and they might be a good fit. You're not going to get that just by the CVs that are sent in all the time.
For sure. Yeah. Listen, guys, can't stress it enough. I think this is a good place for us to leave it. And I have to say, I knew this was going to be an awesome conversation, guys. Robin, thank you. I'm glad that I was able to share. Guys, Robin and I talk like this all the time. It's just funny that we're just like, one of these days we just have to click record and we have to share the conversation. So basically, you got an inside look at some of the stuff that Robin and I talk about. I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you for coming on, and we should definitely do this again.
Absolutely. Well, thank everybody for listening. But most importantly, Tom, thank you for the opportunity. And I know we'll talk again.
Oh, yeah, we will. Oh, yeah, we will. Well, thanks, guys. Share this with your friends, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the show. And if you enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss an episode in the future. And feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you soon.